Thank you, Carl. Yes, I'm Charlotte Bowden, one of the account managers here at the Greater Birmingham and Solihull Local Enterprise Partnership Growth Hub. I'm joined with 4 fabulous Birmingham business leaders today to talk about the topic of sales and selling and how we've had to adapt since COVID-19 into a hybrid world of working. So before we get stuck into the topic, do you want to introduce yourselves, starting with Alex?
Thanks, Charlotte. I'm Alex Tross, Commercial Director at Centric, which is a property group, and within that group I run the commercial agency specialising in advising landlords and tenants on their office assets in the main.
Cool, thank you.
Hi Charlotte, I'm Patricia Colden and I'm the Managing Director and Founder of Colden Human Resources. So we offer HR support services to clients from all sectors in any kind of help that they might need with their people management HR support.
Hi Charlotte, I'm Mo Burry and I am the Managing Director of Momentum Training, and I work with people in business to help them get over the stuff that stops them enjoy selling.
Mm-hmm. And I'm Kate from Kate Hollingsworth Photography, and I work with businesses to help them with their brand and business photography. So I specialise in creating characterful rather than corporate images to help them target their ideal client and get more sales eventually. So that's kind of who I am, Kate Hollingsworth Photography.
How did you all as business leaders or businesses adapt to this sudden hybrid working and having to create relationships online? How did you adapt?
It must have been tough for you, all the weddings stopped.
Yeah, my diary, literally, everything slid out of my diary. So one day I had a packed diary for the whole year because I was a wedding photographer in the main. I'd done bits of commercial photography, but it hadn't been my main focus. So everything fell out the diary and I did go, what am I going to do? And I did a course and then realised I got all of these skills and realised that actually my passion was in business photography and branding people and working with small business because it was so creative. But I literally saw everything fall out of my diary and had to do a bit of a change about. But again, it was sudden, and actually on part of my course they made us use Zoom. And I was like, I'm not going to be able to talk to people on Zoom. And actually it worked surprisingly well.
Yeah. I think I perhaps had a different experience because as a provider of a HR service, when we suddenly went into lockdown and everything changed so rapidly and dramatically for employers, they were knocking my door down virtually. I didn't have to look for sales at that point because people were finding us. They were trying to work out how to furlough people, how to deal with the staff they did have, and I was literally one page ahead of the the guidance from the government, trying to lead them through. So I think I had quite a different experience in that sense. Unfortunately, I suppose, for my own business. So it was quite different.
And what about you, Alex? How did you suddenly go from predominantly of your work being face-to-face to then suddenly having to download Zoom and Teams like the rest of us?
I mean, on the landlord side, not a huge amount changed actually, because they were used to conversations. The initial conversation typically would happen face-to-face, but after that you might communicate over the phone or what have you. I think the interesting part was because of the lockdowns, how that impacted the office market in particular, tenants needed a very different service. People, in response to hybrid working and the change from an HR practice perspective, we had to adapt very quickly to new questions we were being asked and find a way to generate income when we couldn't from the traditional route of just letting space. So it was a steep and sometimes painful learning curve actually, but I think having come out the back of the COVID sort of pandemic, we're all better equipped now to perhaps absorb any shocks that come down the line.
Yeah. I think one thing that I find especially interesting and definitely got passionate about is this whole concept about relationship selling. And actually it's great to establish that relationship with a prospect and obviously a client when they're an existing client. But how do you find that you did that when it's suddenly become online rather than those face-to-face interactions? Like how did you guys find that relationship side?
It can be a lot more difficult, although Skype for Business was around and people would occasionally have these Zoom meetings. We are we're humans, aren't we? We're pack animals and we like to be in the same space to get a feeling and connect with people. And all of a sudden a lot of that was taken away. But at least we had video. Imagine if the pandemic had happened 15 years ago before any of that was available, it would have been really, really challenging.
Yeah,
At least been able to look in people's faces and look in their eyes. And, in larger meetings have a breakout session and have a bit of a chat. we've just had to change the way we do it. We've lost that natural instinct to bond, and we have to do it a bit more.
I think it was easier with when it was perhaps one or two people you were talking to over Teams to maintain and develop that relationship. Where I struggled is where you were in a group scenario and you just haven't got the same dynamic when you're not face to face, and particularly when people were turning cameras off as well in certain scenarios and you couldn't see any response or body language. That was very different and very much more difficult to maintain those relationships, I think.
I think, No, I think what's interesting in property is that it was so heavily relationship driven previously. You could be complacent about the actual proposition.
Okay.
I think what's been interesting is actually people have got better at articulating what the benefit of engaging with that particular service provider is, because you can't just rely on having golfed or networked with that individual. Because there's the substitutes, there are lots of them, and they do a similar thing. If you're a charter surveyor, you're a charter surveyor, so the service you get will ultimately be very similar. So it's the route to that service that typically drove the choice prior. You strip that away, then the buyer has to be very conscious about actually, why is it that individual? And in terms of what we do, work with landlords, for example, it can be a very long relationship. So you have to be very careful about who you go on that journey with. So actually, in some ways, it's better because if you can articulate your proposition, then you can offset if you don't perhaps have that long-term relationship. So it's, there are some pros as well.
Yeah.
I think that's true about similar with photography, because there are an awful lot of photographers out there, and I've learned that you have to be really clear what your messaging is and articulate what you give that makes you different to everybody else and what makes you stand out. And the other thing I wanted to say was I think Zoom's been brilliant. I still make people come on Zoom calls if they will rather than the phone, because I still read everyone's body language. I still look to see, have I really annoyed them by this suggestion? Am I pushing them too far, saying that we need to do this, and how are they responding to it? And I can tell, and you can read.
You can, yeah. We have.
It's strange, isn't it? Because even, sorry to cut across you, but it's weird now because culturally there's a shift, because prior we had obviously phone calls and conference calls, but now if there's a Zoom call and someone has the camera off, it feels almost rude.
Yes.
Because we all expect to be able to see people
much
now, whereas
so.
decades prior we didn't have that expectation. So it's we've evolved a little bit.
Yeah,
Definitely.
I think some clients I've spoken to over the last couple of months have said it's definitely shortened their sales cycle. Like from what you said, actually you can be more to the point. If there's a group of people that offer the same service or product, it's very much now, I suppose, a clear-cut, conversation, rather than being able to generate this lovely relationship on the golf course over 5 months. It can be quite clear-cut, can't it?
I think that's true, and I think it's about matching the service that you provide to their needs first, and then the relationship almost comes afterwards, doesn't it? But you don't almost waste each other's times in working out whether it's a good fit in the first place. So I think it has orientated.
I think there's other advantages. We can now have quick meetings. You don't have to go a long way. You can have quick meetings early in the morning with your pyjamas on the bottom half. Nobody knows. But also, if you are into reading micro expressions and really paying attention to that, you can pin that person and really look at what their face is doing. It tells you a lot of information about how they're thinking. And we're all naturally good at that.
Do you think there's a potential on that point? Do you think there's a potential gap then in our skill set in that element? Because I mean, especially from my background, all of the sales training was delivered face to face, and it was very much body language, rapport building. I don't think we've ever been trained on relationships online. So that's that still feels very new. So do you feel like there's a bit of a gap there that?
We were all thrown into it, weren't we? We were all like, yes, okay, it's all gone. All of a sudden I've got to see these people on the screen, I've got to figure out how Zoom works, and we were forced to be okay with it. But there is a skill set there. There are certain things that you can do to make yourself more attractive to the person you're talking to by the space that you occupy, the lighting, things like that. And also learning how to read people in a way that helps you see the body language that you'd otherwise miss. Because if you were talking to somebody and you could see that they weren't really engaging with the conversation through the way their body was moving, you might tweak that, you might do something different, whereas all you get is head and shoulders now. So get a bit smarter about, again, reading faces, reading tone.
I think it's also more about active listening, really actively listening as well. and not relying so much on the non-verbal cues. And I think that's a skill set which is perhaps slightly different now and slightly more, has to be more enhanced.
It feels more dangerous, doesn't it, when we're online to look at those emails, to look at things pinging here, there and everywhere. And, you know, guilty of it myself. But you can, when I'm watching somebody, I can tell when someone's doing it as well.
Yes, I'm thinking, gosh, you wouldn't have done that in a face-to-face meeting. Imagine getting your phone out in a face-to-face meeting. You wouldn't have dreamt of doing that, and yet it's because we sort of had to figure out how this worked. But now it's time to get a bit smarter about it, because it opens up so many more opportunities.
Yes, it does.
You can have a conversation with somebody in another country, on another continent, whereas in the past it would have involved lots of emails or phone calls or jumping on a plane. And now you've got access to the whole world just by sitting at your desk, if you're willing to go there.
I think time has definitely become something that we've appreciated more. Absolutely. You know, from doing maybe one meeting a day. You know, if you've had to travel, you can now do 4 or 5 meetings a day. So actually, from a business point of view, actually what you can try and achieve has definitely increased. But interestingly, a bit of a stat for you. A recent study by McKinsey & Co. claim nearly 80% still of business-to-business decision makers still prefer that human interaction. So have you found this increase now, kind of post-COVID, is creeping back?
Definitely for the first meeting,
Okay.
the sort of first prospect meeting, it's really important then, I think, to have a face-to-face dialogue. But then I find in my case, once I've established that relationship, then not so. It becomes more efficient then to revert to Teams and phones. But if I'm actually then working with the business, it's really important to see the business in action from a culture point of view, understand the way they interact, their values, because that shapes the support that we provide. So I think it's sort of half and half for us. There are certain things that we need to be on site for, others which are just much more efficient, done remotely. And people have appreciated that, I think, from a time-saving perspective.
I think the hybrid thing, though, really does work. And whether it's the first meeting or you have a quick chat for first meeting and then decide, yes, it is worth driving to London or whatever it is that you've got to do. Networking as well, that's quite often hybrid now. So you instead of meeting every week, you might meet once a month. And there's a lot you can do and it's obviously great for the environment as well. There's a lot less people sitting in cars. So there is a lot, I think there's a lot of things you can do to use it to open up more markets, save yourself time, become more efficient.
And Kate, how have you, because I know your whole business model pivoted in COVID, so, and even though you adapted to kind of being online, have you found it now that people are wanting to do more face-to-face, or?
Do you know, I was just thinking, I don't think they do. I have one client who is on, they're on a year-long package, so they do a lot of shoots with me, and we do meet in person because we get more done, and then I can work with them on messaging and posts and like reels and things like that. We do it in the meeting. But everybody else is still quite happy to do it all online until we have to do the shoot. Obviously, we don't do that remotely. But I did do some of those in lockdown, and I've got a client in Germany who wants me to do remote shoots, and that's been great for big companies with people all over the world they just want headshots of everybody to show that they are global, and we've done those virtually through an app. It's crazy. I literally tether to their phone. I help them with the lighting. I direct them through the phone. So say you're holding the phone, and I'm directing you and the person who's taking the photo of, and I'm sitting at my computer going click, 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 and then I edit it.
Amazing.
It's a bit mind-blowing.
Yeah. And Alex, have you seen the industry, have kind of property industry just all suddenly wanted to go back to face-to-face, or has there still been that resistance?
It's really interesting, actually, because in terms of the interaction piece, I think we all went through that first summer, which was great, lots of barbecues, no commute, time with the family, everything's great. You then throw in a cold winter, too much time with your family, and all of a sudden everyone's clamouring for the office again. So I think from our perspective, day-to-day, advising landlords in particular, there's been a real focus for us in terms of advising landlords on what they need to do to make their space attractive, because people want to accommodate that interaction piece. So people are using offices very differently. We all want and miss that. And you can see from the bars and restaurants in Birmingham, for example, when the lockdowns were eased, everyone rushed back because we'd missed that interaction, that conversation, that face-to-face. So, but equally, we still hold on quite tightly to that flexibility we enjoyed during the lockdown. So there's a balance to be struck. But the industry, I think, is evolving, because if you are recruiting, for example, you need to be able to offer flexibility, and you'll know much more about this than me. But equally, building culture, training, succession planning, all those things are much easier to do when you're all in the same space. So in terms of advice, we now give both occupiers on terms of how their office should function, and landlords and what they need to do to deliver that. It's trying to get that balance right between getting people into an office but allowing that flexibility as well. So it's not everyone's worked it out, but we're getting there.
That's probably one of the hot topics on the agenda for most of my clients at the moment, how you get that effective balance between people working remotely or in hybrid and maintaining a cohesive workforce, maintaining team, sense of teamwork, etc. And everybody, I think, is grappling to find the right model. But I think it's completely changed the shape of the labour market. Like you say, for recruitment, people are now expecting some degree of flexibility, and that's a positive as well, because it's opened up those frontiers in terms of geography. You might get your best talent from Liverpool now. You don't have to stay in that kind of geographical location. So it does have some benefits, but it's certainly that and employee well-being, because the other thing that I think has arisen as a result of COVID is this massive impact on mental health and mental ill health, coupled with the latest economic forecasts and climate. So that's the second thing now. It's about how you maintain that well-being of people who are working disparately and hybridly.
Absolutely.
So it's quite a big conundrum at the moment for most companies.
Coming back in, don't we? Especially for the youngsters coming through, because if everyone's working their silos in their home offices, we need to get us back together to train up and get us reading each other's skills and doing the training. But
in a flexible way, because that's what people are now expecting. It's changed people's expectations. People like being at home to answer the door to Amazon and walk the dog, and
Absolutely.
And
If you're managing a team of people, getting them all together in a room, as you say, building that team, getting that connection, getting the buzz, that can be really important. But again, it's finding that balance that you can do a lot online without them having to come in. And as long as you can find the balance for the right people, and it will be different in every organisation, then you can still keep that energy up and do it more personally. You can have that one-to-one, which is really quality one-to-one time when it's on Zoom, because you're really face-to-face and you can get as close as you need to. And it allows you to sort of still keep that focus on the thing that the business needs to have happen.
Yeah, I suppose it's about going back to the basics and understanding what your business does as a core, and what do we need to have in place to be productive, and to be as productive as we were pre-COVID, if not ideally more productive. And if that's just about understanding our people or understanding our processes, it's just maybe a little bit more about getting to the grips with that. And if that means that we provide hybrid working, doing more things for people's well-being, if then we can still sell and create all of these relationships with our clients and prospects, then actually it should make us ideally more productive overall and have a positive shift, really. Have any of you had staff, kind of sales staff, that you've had to manage in a different way due to this, kind of maybe performance and it being a hybrid world and it being really different?
Yeah, I think we talked about the impact of the hybrid model. I think management has had to evolve because historically you could sort of open your door, check that whoever's there at their desk, they look okay, fine, management done, box ticked, off you go, absolutely. Appraisal done. I think now you've got to have a much sort of broader approach to management in terms of, if they are at home, for example, is their setup right? Are they at home in a home share? Are their kids with them? So all that now impacts, because it's not just about when they come in the door, when they leave. Your management extends to their home situation potentially as well. So that creates a different layer, and the check-ins have to be much more meaningful now and really ask good questions and be present in terms of what the issues are that impact whether they can be productive. And I think post-COVID, people now are much more aware of those mental health well-being issues. And I think prior to the pandemic, management probably didn't extend to those issues to the same extent. So my team is very diverse. Some are more in the office, and a number of them are sort of displaced in the field. And the way you have to interact with them has to change, and that's probably very different to how it was when they're all just at a desk and you could pop out and just have a quick look.
Yeah, I think as a growth hub, we've definitely seen that need for support when it comes to kind of mid-management levels with this new area of what's expected from them, because previously, like you said, in the office, it was very kind of standard, this is how to manage. Whereas now you are having to adapt to multitude of situations and scenarios, and especially with people that are taking on apprentices. You know, how do we get them to adapt to hybrid working? How do you get to teach them the art of selling and, you know, generating relationships online and in person? They have to, you know, suddenly switch what they're doing. So I think that middle management piece has really kind of, you know, had a focus on it for sure, hasn't it?
It's much harder to organically share good practice and mentor people from a distance because they're not next to you.
You miss the water cooler chats.
Absolutely,
And things like that.
yeah, absolutely so. You know, you don't go on a Teams call for somebody to ask a really minor question, whereas they might have wheeled the chair back and said, can I just ask you about this? So people are missing out on that kind of organic nurturing and mentoring, I think. So it is a different skill set for managers in a way. They've got to look for different things and different responses from their employees as well to check that they're doing okay, that they're working effectively, they're not isolated. So it is a new learning experience, I think, for managers, very much so.
In sales in particular, just overhearing a conversation and being able to go, well, how did you handle that? Or
Exactly.
if you're training, to go, oh, I just overheard this, maybe try this. And to do it in the moment is much more effective. Absolutely. It's very difficult to do that when you're remote. So sales in particular is something that you learn by osmosis in the main. And that suffers, you know, a huge amount when you can't do that, when they're not sitting right next to you. You don't overhear those things. You don't know when to step in because you've not overheard a poor conversation, for example.
Yeah.
So that person might maintain those bad habits much longer because you can't overhear it and get engaged.
And not learning from the experts and the...
Just overhearing stuff is
Yeah,
actually really
exactly.
quite powerful, isn't it? So
very much
lose that.
That's probably why sales coaching has become more of a thing. It was always before, get everybody in a room, run a program, everybody's learned the skills. Whereas now it's much more, certainly for me, one-to-one, somebody who's struggling. So they can have that, okay, this situation is coming up and I don't know how to handle it, or this happened, what could I do to fix it? And whether that's an online sort of access or something face-to-face, a lot of the time now it's online. And they want somebody that they can just sit with and go, right, this is what I did last week, this is what worked, this is what didn't work, where do I go from here?
Yeah.
So again, it's changing, and it's probably a good thing that it does.
It's the same for sharing company values as well. It's very hard to do that when you're not present and together because that's about role modelling the right behaviours, and if people aren't seeing those all the time, it's a very different
Did you also have a Christmas do online and the horror that is?
Absolutely.
So yeah, we don't want any more of that.
Please don't press record.
Imagine when people do get unleashed for a proper Christmas party.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's interesting what you just said, Mo, because actually I think we all remember the kind of smile when you dial. You know, but actually, if you know, there is some skills there with that, because actually, if you've been at home isolated all day, and you go into this client meeting and you pitch, actually, how is your, your tone and your body language? Whereas if you have just come from another face-to-face interaction, you might find that there are slight differences to how you are perceived. And I think, there's definitely maybe a skills gap there with certain people and certain businesses that we can try and support with.
The great news is it is a learnable skill.
Yeah.
All of these things are learnable skills, and with the right guidance, the right coaching and training, you can genuinely get into a place where you can be just as comfortable in a face-to-face event as you can in an online event as you can face-to-face. And as I say, sometimes it's even better because you can. You don't miss words when you're face-to-face with somebody, when you're on a virtual call, because you can turn up the volume, or you can put your headset on, or you can really pick up every sound and every nuance in the tone that you probably wouldn't pick up in another environment. And it just gives you a chance to see people in more detail, I suppose. But again, it's all skills. It's just different skills now.
Yeah.
But doable.
That's okay. And I suppose, have you, this is to all four of you, have you got some digital or in-person tactics or tips that have helped you pivot and grow your business? Not sure who wants to go first for this one. Probably UK, because you've had to pivot.
Done?
Yeah.
I've completely changed how I do my sales process. I think of myself as quite anti-sales, but I'm very clear about what I do in the run-up. So it's all digital, but I'll start with like a questionnaire to get them already thinking about. I didn't know. Because people think it's just a headshot, so already they're thinking, oh, no, she offers other things, what's going on here? So that by the time we come to the phone call, they're like either interested or they're like, no, we just want headshots, so we just want that, thank you very much. Or they're like, oh, you offer other things, tell me about it. But it is all very digital. It's like, oh, here's a brochure, here's a questionnaire, right. So when they come to me, they're already understanding what I offer and why I'm different to other photographers, so that by the time we get into it's a lot more seamless. And I found that a lot easier for actually ending up only speaking to people who are really going to book me, because they understand what it's all about.
Okay, so actually it helped you.
Qualifying more.
So adapting actually helped.
Yeah.
You did it more for your business rather than the prospect side of things, trying to make it easier for them. You actually did it to make it easier for you.
That's how mercenary.
If it's made you more productive, though, and then
More efficient.
yeah,
Way more efficient. And it is better for them, because I don't want to waste their time either. If they
Yeah.
don't, if that's not what they want, you know, that's fine.
and you know, you don't also want those awkward Zoom or Teams conversations where you're trying to sell yourself and they've got cameras off, and actually it'd just be really difficult and awkward anyway.
Or they're like, no, we didn't want any of this. Why are we on this Zoom call? That would be terrible.
Yeah. Okay. Mo?
So what did I do? Well, I actually noped out of lockdown. I sort of went, no, I'm face-to-face trainer. I'm not doing this. It'll all be over by September, much as I'd hoped. And eventually I had to figure it out. So I started looking at, okay, Zoom training is a thing. I can do this. So I started learning how to do whiteboards and polls and and I hated it, utterly hated every second of it. And I was on a training, because I'm a bit of a learning junkie, so I'm always on a course of some sort. And the woman concerned had a standing desk, a flip chart behind her, and she stood up and trained to the screen, to the camera, just as I would have in a room. And I went, oh, I could do that. And so that was my biggest shift, not trying to think I have to become a Zoom trainer, but actually do what I do naturally, do what I've always done, just to a camera instead of a person. You don't get the same feedback, you can't sort of have the big discussions and things, but there is a lot you can do. But yeah, I really struggled at first, but then you just have to adapt, don't you?
Yeah. And since, you know, kind of post-COVID, shall we say, have things, you know, been the same, and you've still been able to be as productive as you know, pre?
More so, actually. A lot more of my clients that would have brought people from all over the world, which is a very expensive way of setting up a training, and you have a big conference room or a hotel event, and there's all the rooms. Now we just all bundle online, and we do it online, and we use breakout rooms so people can have those more intimate discussions and those sort of subject discussions. But ultimately, it works surprisingly well. And it's lovely when somebody says, I felt like you were talking to me, and there's like 100 people on the call. So yeah.
Okay.
But
So actually that being online made your service feel a little bit more personable,
yeah.
even
And-
though it's online.
Yeah, if you've got a group of 100 people, it's hard to get really in detail with each person. Whereas with the chat and things like that, you can really pull people's comments and ideas, and while you're still managing the event and the conversation. So yeah, it's. I'm pleased to say I'm still doing face-to-face. That's back in my agenda.
Good.
But surprisingly, quite a lot of it's still, people are happy to do it online.
Yeah, and it's a good, interesting point that you made then about the chat. You tend to find a lot of people that maybe wouldn't have said comments face to face. You tend to find there's a lot of questions being asked in chats. There's a lot of comments, a lot more feedback, because we've got this little screen of protection almost. So at least people are being heard, and there's no kind of leaving the room and not having something be said or discussed, which I think is a real positive, isn't it?
Absolutely,
Yeah.
very much so. When you've got somebody who's a little bit quieter and just genuinely doesn't want to speak up in a discussion, they will do in the chat, which is great, because then you engage everybody.
I think there are two things for me. I think, a bit like Kate, I had to sharpen my product offering and be a bit clearer in terms of how I could support businesses, rather than it through networking or just general conversation. It sort of organically evolves. You can sort of work out what they need without being very direct. But when you haven't got that opportunity, you've got much less time in a Teams call, and it's naturally more structured. I think it forced me to really think about what the service is and how it could be broken down into a menu to be more tailored to the individual providers, people I'm providing to. But I think the other aspect as well for me was being less shy about asking existing clients to make recommendations. And I think that is quite a powerful sales tool in itself, which I think is something I've started to do much more of.
Okay, that's great. So actually it kind of brought you out of your comfort zone to having to ask for different things, because the way of the world's changed, and you wouldn't have been introduced maybe at a network, like at a bar or something. Actually now you need to to ask for those referrals.
Yeah,
In
exactly.
order to,
It's less organic, it's more
Yeah.
structured than it was.
Okay.
So,
It's a very good way of being able to pivot there, and a great example of what it is that you've done. Yeah.
Yeah, I think for me the biggest change has been use of social media. So prior to Centric, I worked for very traditional property businesses that were sort of very data-driven, with lots of documents that you'd send out to prospective clients, etc. And Centric is a much more fast-paced, entrepreneurial type business. So when I first joined, it was like, right, we're going to do some videos of you doing, and I was like, well, I'm not entirely sure that I'm on board with this. But actually, once I was convinced to do it and did some, and it worked well, the engagement was really, really quite good and very positive. So now, we've got Instagram programs and in-house marketing teams and TikToks and videos and lots of content being generated, etc. So the power of that is something I wasn't really that receptive to prior. But now people are engaging with the world very different now because of Amazon and online and everything else, and hybrid working and being at home on your laptop or device. So that, I think, is a much easier way to engage your potential marketplace, because you can reach people in a much more efficient and in an easier way than perhaps was the case prior. So I'm a convert. I'm not quite ready for TikTok, but certainly Instagram's doing okay so far. And LinkedIn, even things like LinkedIn, which I didn't really use effectively prior. It was sort of just professional Facebook, wasn't it? But now it's actually a real tool to engage with the market that you wouldn't access ordinarily. So I think the use of those digital tools has been, as part of the sales kit, is much more important now than it was prior.
Yeah, and I think we do have to kind of blame COVID for that, because I don't think that shift would have naturally happened. Like you said, be it property being in that kind of traditional world, if there wasn't COVID, I don't think any of us would have been brave enough or even thought about suddenly going to do videos. So it's almost, we have to be thankful for that, because it did force us to do these things, didn't it, for sure.
And LinkedIn's all about building relationships, isn't it? And I've found, for my business especially, and it's quite easy to build relationships there, just to find people that are like-minded, and it doesn't feel, not for me, it doesn't feel fake. It feels quite honest and real, and then you can just find and have conversations, and which can lead on to work, which is, I find, brilliant. And I would never have gone on LinkedIn like you.
Which is the right way to use LinkedIn.
yes.
Some people don't quite get that, and you get this sort of pushy sales. And it's just, it's not what it's for. It's a gigantic room of networking. And okay, they're online, but it's no different to a room. You go and have conversations and help each other out.
Still got to be relevant, haven't you?
Yeah.
Fab. Well, I suppose in summary, then it's really obvious that you've all had to pivot. You've just all four of you have just done it in different ways. But the positive from that has been that actually the way that you have pivoted has made all of your businesses or all of your roles become more productive. It's just now a very different way, but we are still enjoying the mix of face-to-face, but also embracing that kind of digital online presence as well. Would you all agree?
Completely.
Yeah. Fab. Okay. Well, thank you all for joining me today.
Thank you.
It's been great talking to you about the lovely topic of sales.